Welcome everyone. Complete history of Adventure Time, and it all begins with the famous phrase from the Lit. Before there was time, before there was anything existed, nothingness, and before that. To exist, nothingness existed, monsters, that's what to say that reality exists in the beginning. Like a chaotic sea of monsters, and there we can see beings like Orgulor, Kokon TP. And who knows, maybe even lit up them for the creation of the reality we know. Something happened that we don't know about. Motivation, however, these monsters. They eventually reached a common agreement about the state of reality, and from this, the multiverse emerges. And then, the concept is very cool and important part of the Time of Universe adventure. Just a reminder that I'm going bring this and some other information from the book Adventure Time, the Union and Miles' super secret scrapbook that I believe is not available in Portuguese. But there's a lot of cool information there, so according to the respondent, the multiverse is not something material after all. He was born from the consciousness of those beings. This is what to say that every thinking being that lives this multiverse is directly part of his essence. Ultimately, his consciousness is a small part of everything. The consciousnesses that ultimately create what is reality, and that also means that all these thinking beings see a existence beyond the material, and this is known as the soul, and taking away this part we don't know much. We don't know where did the monsters come from, or what is their true nature of reality, everything. What do we know about the world before existence comes from that single glimpse, which we saw thanks to Lit in the old episode styles, but anyway after the creation of multiverse imagined by the monsters, we believe that what happened was fundamental. Something like the Big B, but instead from just one universe this creation resulted in a vast, perhaps infinite number of dimensions, and within each. So the universe exists because of dimension. This is the union of all dimensions. It's called the multiverse, and it's very common for people seeing some of the characters in these multiverses. For example, the world of Farm World is a dimension where the bomb didn't explode, that's what it did, that the future would be completely different from how we know it in the cartoon original, and this is repeated in others. Universes like in the dimension of Fion Cake, where everyone has their gender reversed. Princess Chimera's dimension, purple, whereas everything is very strange and somewhat rudimentary. There's also the world of Pillows, where everything is literally made of pillows, and in that dimension there are no versions of the characters that she knows the original, in addition to many others, like Lamb Space, the Astral Planar, Crystal Dimension, Alette Sphere, Citadel, and much more, and in the center of this whole complex system of dimensions is the dimension that contains the room of time, and this dimension is responsible by creating the temporal waves that affect all other dimensions, and she is the abode of the almighty prism, one of the cosmic entities from Adventure Time. We'll talk about that in more detail later. Another important thing is that these dimensions can be connected in three ways. Different forms, first of a form permanent like that whirlpool in cave that leads Finho and Jake to the Princess Purple Flower Bed, because it is they're permanently giving access to any time to that dimension already. Another way is when they join together, because wormhole in a natural way, like this is an example of when the end goes to the world of Pillows in the latest form. It would be the artificial creation of the portals, using items of great power the most. It is clear from this that the person being questioned himself, by putting all the stones together, it is possible to open a portal to anywhere in the entire multiverse, and for you to have an idea of how much power this book has. Each dimension has its own frequency and elasticity, and how the frequencies are different for you. Traveling to another dimension is necessary to adjust the frequencies to achieve this, and elasticity is how much of that dimension can change its frequency. Then the less elastic, more power will be needed for to be able to make a connection, and the respondent simply manages to make a connection with all existing dimensions. Another what's cool is that the dimensions are highly elastic. Bands are also more easily influenced by magic, and that elasticity can vary over time, leaving the magic weaker and is. That's exactly what's going to happen with the land in our history, and now we go to talk about cosmic entities Prismo, as we were already saying. It exists because of the consciousness of an old sleeping man, and he is the guardian of the time chamber and the master of wishes. After all, he is capable of granting a wish. For each person who manages to reach his room, however, his powers are limited if desire interferes, and are to be even more powerful than him and the only being we've seen this happen to. It was with Golb, but Prismo already mentioned it. That he has a boss. If that happens, my boss, let me repeat, my boss. He's going to say it's all my fault. I even theorized that the boss of Prismo be the evil one, that character that appears next to the Golb in the book with her. Simon is reading this at the end of the series. The character figuratively represents Abraxas. That's a good summary of a simplified form for the Gnostics that it is an early form of Christianity. This being would be below God and is the responsible for the creation of the worlds, and this would explain why he is the boss of Prismo. After all, he created everything, and Prismo, it is a key part that governs all of this. He created it, and he still is the counterpoint to it. The existence of Golb, creation versus destruction and chaos, being then the beings more powerful than we already know. Cosmic Owl takes charge of monitoring the dreams of every being in the multiverse, and she has a machine that when one falls, the coin must be inserted into one of them, and all the dreams that the Cosmic Owl has, they are prophetic, that is, that which it happened in a dream, even though it had different interpretations, will occur in reality, inevitably, and even having all this power, she feels good. Pressured by the duty she has in addition to being somewhat lonely living in the far reaches of the multiverse in a hotel made entirely of stars. Luck. That's because, over time, she ended up becoming one of Prismo's best friends, and is very interesting because Prism is basically the manifestation of a dream. So perhaps that explains a connection deeper between the two and others. Entities that also have a connection are life and death, those two. Ironically, they ended up becoming boyfriend and girlfriend. They are responsible for the souls of all beings after they die, and death is the ruler of the world of dead, which has several levels, being the first world of the dead the most terrible and disgusting of them, where even the most hostile souls go there to suffer, and even becoming part of that place in the counterpoint, the highest of them. The 50th world of the dead is the place where the most evolved souls go. An eternal meditation, a kind of nirvana where they no longer have any worry, forgetting the past and the future and only living in the present. Complete peace, and in the midst of it there's plus 48 worlds where each soul will be assigned to one of them according to your actions in that life. Seem like you ended up in the 37th dead world, because excluding the people who go as far as the Quo. In this world, these souls have the possibility of reincarnation, and the one who takes care of that is Divinity Life. When a soul arrives in her kingdom, she molds the new body in her potter's wheel and sends them back to reborn, but only when they return. They no longer have their memories, of course. However, they can maintain a cosmic connection, tenuous with their ancestors, including this happened countless times with the End. And other very important entities are Catalyst comets. Every 1,000 years, a Catalyst comet reincarnates mysteriously and collides with the Earth, bringing Endo along with an agent of change. Then every time the comet come to Earth bringing this agent of change, or it could be to transform this world in a better place, or else they bring great evil to the world. In each of his reincarnations it comes in a different color, and we know 4 of them, the green one, yellow, blue, and purple. Then they end up being perhaps one of the most important agents, important for the course of history of planet Earth, which formed there billions of years ago, and carries with it the concept of 5 elements fundamentals: fire, ice, candy, and slime, being the main elements, and the pit acting as an anti-element, but almost Nobody knows about the existence of core element, and therefore it is always depicted as having only 4 elements, therefore they have always existed. Incarnations of these 4 elements, and these would be the elemental mages. Powerful figures who will influence history of the earth, and some periods having the power to manipulate one's own element. This happens every time an elemental dies. Your soul is reincarnated in a new body, which means that there is almost always one living representative for each element any moment. Now the Lumberliger antimatter is a molecular network subspace that unites the forces. Scientific and magical of the most powerful you more than any other element, it is the force that orders reality in its true form. And let's remember that like all the magic uses, the power of the elementals is entirely dependent on elasticity of the Earth's dimension, already bringing up a future topic to make a comparison to Earth in the period before the Mushroom War will happen. It was too stiff in its elasticity. So basically, magic is almost non-existent. It existed and was considered a myth, including, and we see the difference in power of the elementals when the evergreen ice elemental in prehistory is capable of building an entire castle of ice as a fire elemental in pre-war struggle to achieve warmth. A cup of coffee, including the story Do Evergreen, is the oldest record what we have of planet Earth during the era of the dinosaurs. Each elemental ruled their respective kingdom, and the elemental of ice and urgency evergreen that a servant, the dinosaur named Gunter, that I admired very much his master because of his power and of his magic, and that is why he hoped one day become his magical apprentice, but that wait was always in vain, because the evergreen gave false hopes that one day it would happen, but he never seriously considered doing that until that one day the evergreen note coming from the sky, the green catalyst comet, and realizes that he is much more powerful than the others who came before him. He carries so much power that it would end the greatest part of life on the planet, and thus the evergreen is looking for a way to stop him. He uses his knowledge of technology and magic to build a golden crown capable of granting his bearer its greatest desire. But why this? If it worked, he needed an object. Ruby Eyes of the lava dog Maggie Wood to help in the battle against Magwood and regain the green eyes. Summons 3 other elementals to their castle of their kingdoms, only that they don't take anything he says seriously, speaking and stating that plan of the crown was very dangerous and reminiscent of. He believes that even if they die in some way, at some point they will reincarnate again, and in the end, it turns out they were right. But he doesn't care at all. He simply frees the other elementals and go facing Magwood alone, and even despite the difficulty, he eventually manages to do it. That's going straight back to the castle to activate the crown, and as soon as Everin is about to use the crown to defeat the comet, the lava dog attacks his castle and the evergreen gets trapped on the rubble far from the crown, and now the only one who could do that was his apprentice Gunter. But when he wearing the crown is not his greatest desire defeating the comet, but rather being equal to it. Your master is starting to look like his master and gaining his powers from ice, and that first wish of Gunter, it would become ingrained in that crown like that. Everyone who wore the crown afterwards, he would feel the effects of desire. Primarily his appearance changes, becoming with the elongated nose, the hair, white beards, and together the powers of ice that slowly consumes the user of the crown is driving him increasingly insane and disconnected from your reality. And another thing is the awareness of each. The crown user will be trapped inside these circuits for all eternity, but finally the green bringing comet ends, hitting the ground and killing the 4 elementals, and probably also was the cause of the extinction of the dinosaurs, and there is a high chance, because of its color and the flames in the shape of horn, that the agent of change of this comet may be the personification of itself. Lit, an incarnation of whose only desire he claims to be the one who extinguishes all life. Last Golf Scholar, although I don't know exactly what that is. It means, but the logic of your plan, it becomes very clear. After all, how does the The multiverse is created by beings aware of the objective of the lit, which is the end of life would mean the end of in the multiverse. Killing everyone would be what it would be like. That reality would return to its state, initial chaos in that sea of monsters. So this is the ultimate goal of Lit. However, he would remain asleep for millennia, waiting for the right opportunity to rise to power, and so on for many years. Things would pass and wizards would still emerge, and in prehistory they would create a place. A secret place called Wizard City, but only, at that time they were dark wizards, who worshipped and drew their power from in the midst of a known primordial monster. Like Kokon TP that we had already seen there in the Sea of Monsters, however, somewhere. At that moment he would end up dying, and the wizards, those who use black magic, would weaken, losing power to other mages who were against the use of this. A type of magic, but the dark wizards, they knew the death could not contain the Kokon TPE forever. Like this they create, and they seal his body in a tomb. Gigantic, and they bury it in a place secret in the depths of the city, and it was most likely during this era that the wizards gained access for the first time to the Enchiridion, that book which, as he said, it is one of the most magical artifacts, powerful beings of the multiverse, and it is very interesting because we don't know its exact origin, because throughout the story was written and enchanted by thousands of different wizards, and because of being a magic book, it can change every reading. Depending on who is reading, he can even be translated automatically by the language of the person who is reading it. Then he can really be. A lot of things are said in the beginning, that the original volume has over 8 million copies. Pages and several summarized copies are eventually produced, all keeping its magical properties. The Enchiridion, what we know, is divided into two parts. One part for heroes and the other for wizards. He teaches the heroes how to behave and serve their people better. Master magicians teach magicians how perform many old forms and secrets of magic, and very important information. What's important, and somewhat mysterious, is that the book says that every 10,000 years he transports its original author to the time room, and there he was along with the Prismo must make a choice that they can force the multiverse to redefine itself. How it was 10,000 years ago, or could it be allow it to continue existing in known for over 10,000 years, and is said which the author almost always chooses redefine it. What could be a great influence on the history of drawing, but we have no connection to this. But finally, after this age of wizards, eventually the elasticity and the power of the magic on Earth is starting to become more weakened, and this may be directly linked to Kokon's death. However, we don't know for sure what happens. That the extinction of the dinosaurs allowed that mammals began to dominate, plus the planet, causing the appearance of them who were thinking beings known as humans, but it wasn't just they. Along with humans, actually even vampires also came before them. And then the comic Cactrodora, he brings a gigantic period dark where probably the dinosaurs were distinct, and with this would give space for humans, and also the vampires appear, but other forms of life already existed long ago, a very long time away from Earth, including Mars is one of those places with a population of somewhat mysterious origin. It is a self-proclaimed utopian society that we don't know exactly where from it came, but they certainly have something direct relationship with humans. The issue most emblematic is his own ruler, Abraham Lincoln, the president from the United States that was supposed to have been dead in 1865. They finally managed to reach an agreement, with Death bribing her with a coin, 1 cent, so that instead of being if he were dead, he would return to the past, gaining immortality and becoming the king of Mars, and by his side in the government would be Grob Gob Glod Grod, a very powerful being with his flaming sword, which even he would become known on Earth as a deity called Glob, and he is indeed the Magic Man's brother. But from that era, everyone lived in peace and they were friends. This even extends to an event known as the First Coming of Gold, when that An interdimensional monster attacked Mart and he ended up erasing his wife from existence. From Magic Man Amargos, when the Golby swallows some being, it does a sort of digestion, breaking down his layers, returning until his essence is gone, until he leaves. Completely existing, not only dying but literally losing your. Since then nobody ever he remembered more than just Margos, except for the Magic Man himself, who from then on he started looking for her without any success. Even Prismo himself was unable of finding her, becoming more and more crazy and obsessed with it. He ends up creating a security system for Mart, who was basically a clone of his wife, including his own name. Margos, acronym for Automatic Magic Durable Generator of Leisure and Support, and his plan was to place it on top of the mountain, Olympus, to watch over and prevent her Golba's second coming to the planet, only that the Medic Man had ulterior motives. I wanted her to really be one replacement for his wife, however I would never fulfill that role if rebelling against him and transforming all their sadness in wickedness and madness. Meanwhile, Orgolog too, known as the Destroyer of Worlds, traveled through the solar system, dominating, destroying and seeking more and more. Their goal was to absorb her Comet Catalyst, and when one of them in the Colliello was about to collide with the land, he will pursue that goal. But the King of Mart would not bow down. The tyranny of this monster, ordering the Grog Gog Glod Grod to defeat him with his a flaming sword, and he thankfully has success in your battle by banishing a entity for planet Earth that by his atmosphere ended up compressing into a small harmless penguin, a penguin which would become known much later like Gunter, and in that form he doesn't have no memory of who he really is. Despite being an immortal creature, and in this way, he ended up following everything. The history of humanity. So let's go, take a quick trip here. I was there when the fire was discovered. In the Stone Age, hunted animals in the Neolithic period saw humankind transform. Sedentary life was also part of the ancient Egypt, Greece, and also ancient Rome was part of a cult, and began to shine in life by being part of nobility in the Middle Ages, thus producing your own brand of drinks. Guntos becoming very rich, owning cars and airplanes. Arriving in the modern age, they became a film director and enjoyed it very much. That Hollywood life, however, ended. Getting tired of all this evolving luxury. In a spiritual way, meditating, choosing to have a simpler life in the countryside, and finally, he ventures on a journey of boat and ends up arriving in the kingdom of Ice King, where he is adopted and named like Gunter. However, let's remember that throughout this entire period of evolution of humanity also has many other beings and worlds out there that they even travel through the universe, having an interdimensional connection, giving highlight here, for example, the Drift, a very old space station that brings together various types of alien species. And another important thing that happened meanwhile, there was a war between dogs and Iris Corneos, these two species that they live in the crystal dimension. They have become, at some point they became enemies and began to fighting for territory, starting like this. A war that apparently lasted thousands of years. We don't know for sure. How did it happen? Who won? But the result of this is that these two races, they would continue to harbor resentment, wouldn't they? Getting involved with each other, and so time would pass. The world now lives in it was where magic practically happened. Disappeared over the earth in the times moderns, with the great heroes and wizards of old becoming nothing more than myths and legends, however, still seem. There is a vague awareness of existence of magic, and it is suggested that a significant portion of humans still believes that it is real. Then in the 60s, two very different characters would be born, important not only for the history of Crown but also for the entire universe of Adventure Time: Simon Petrov and Beck Groff. They will both be great scholars in their respective fields. Postgraduate students will study artifacts, ancient times, and their relationship with magic in Petrograd University in Russia. They met shortly before the bet to embark on a 6-month journey to study petroglyphs. Inland Australian woman cancels the trip, and if She's passionate about Simon and all his work, even though I am skeptical and don't believe directly into supernatural things. Simon says that somehow he feels it. Attraction to superstitions, and that's why that he likes studying ties so much. Objects, even though I don't believe in it. Bet she would eventually become engaged to Simon. And they are co-authors of a book called Magical Rituals and their applications in Spacetime. This book contains numerous rituals taken from ancient records from before the disappearance of magic, but back then these rituals they didn't. They could be accomplished because magic she was weakened in that world then. Simon remains skeptical that they can actually be real, and he was. Beyond that, he had a study about ancient beings that led him to discovering the existence of the Gobi itself, one of the most powerful beings being I am the personification of chaos itself. References to this entity were found. Mysterious person who embodies chaos. Great, let's do Sanders, Goob would say. That ice cream has no meaning, and he ironically, I would face such a being one day. However, his studies are interrupted when he is hospitalized AD after a domestic accident involving Bet and a jar of cherries. After that, Simon discovers two very important artifacts in there. Expeditions that challenge your vision, previously skeptical about magic. And first is the evergreen crown that he purchased from an old stevedore in the north of Scandinavia. The second one he discovers with Bet's help in the Ind Kushi, one of the most powerful objects in the entire series. Asked a book capable of opening a portal to anywhere in multiverse after returning home. From these expeditions, he presents his discoveries in the History Museum, but the discoveries received little recognition. After all, I was talking about things superstitious outside of what modern science accepted it, and a journalist Bruce Chalk is even writing an article from a humiliating newspaper article about Simon. But finally, when he returns, he will show the crown for Bet without knowing his. He puts her in true power head like a joke, but suddenly his head is full of secrets of the ice and of the snow, while the crown continues to fulfilling Gunter's wish for everyone those millions of years ago, and their transformation into the mad ice wizard, and the powerful man begins to pursue Bet through streets, screaming for her like Prina Princess, which might be the nickname affectionate that they had, and firing gusts of ice from her hands. She is terrified of the power Simon's uncontrolled behavior, and that's why he has been hiding ever since. Believes that Bet has fled, and therefore perhaps that's the reason he developed it unconsciously, an obsession with to find his princess by doing it to capture in the future and fall in love with all those who held that title of princess by mere remnant of the word linked to his beloved that one day he lost. And after the mysterious Bet, Simon's disappearance, begins to lose his sanity while he slowly the crown succumbs. He engraves tapes documenting his transformation, physical and mental, and now we are approaching one of the most important events. Important, the Great War of Mushrooms, and some very characters. Important people will go through this transition. For example, the MF Mast. Giovanni, known only as Mo, is an extraordinary scientist specializing in robotics that at that time created robots with various purposes for humanity, and your company, MCO, had a lot of prestige, but that he also had a rival, Hugo, who just as he created robots, but he had a much more egocentric view of the business, becoming known for creating generic copies, such as CO, which would be inspired by Amni herself. She would become very famous, and probably is the which leveraged Hugo's company. However, everything indicated that a war was underway, about to arrive, and we don't know what it was. The relationship of these companies with creation of war weaponry, because even Mo creating robots out of passion as well. We will see that he participated in projects like the domes of the Kingdom of Mars, and also the fire giants that are weapons of Kingdom of Fire. And Hugo basically acts, they even theorize out of self-interest, that he might be involved with the creation of the bomb that would release the lit However, while all of this was happening, architected Marceline Abadir VVCS. First years of life together with your mother, she who in a somewhat mysterious way. She is the daughter of that human and the demon, governor of the Nightosphere Hanson Abadir, and she doesn't have that many memories of her childhood. Memories recall that the two lived in trailer and that at some point they made a trip to the beach. Marceline saved these photos on a flash drive, however he ends up being corrupted and even ends up forgetting about that, one of the few memories how happy she would be with her childhood. Because terrible times were coming to arrive, as we have already said, during this period too. Magic is extremely weakened, but the elementals knew each other and they ended up meeting up from time to time. Even with weak powers they began to have visions of a cataclysm, imminent, that soon that world would succumb with the arrival of the Lich, and thus, like in the Evergreen era, the elemental Ice Pens thought they should survive that, but none of the others. The elementals agreed with her, and her selfish plan would be to freeze yourself at the bottom from the sea before anything else. If it happened, the world would now begin to realize a war that was growing ever stronger. The faster Simon realizes this, even right down in your Enchiridion, the Elise becomes increasingly desperate. How will she manage to protect hers daughter? And Hugo, realizing that the result of all that would be catastrophic, begins his plan to evasion of the land, and thus war arrives at its peak with the explosion of the bombs. Nuclear, especially the one that brought from the Lit, returns, and also a mysterious electrical explosion that sucked in a part gigantic of the Earth, and the result of all of this was the creation of a world post-apocalyptic. The vast majority of the population ended up dying instantly, because we can see many skeletons that were doing their daily tasks, and many others were infected with radiation, and still the bomb brought a gigantic elasticity to the Earth, causing magic would return, and that creatures of various kinds, parts of the multiverse, had access to that world in that way, who managed to survive all of this, in addition to fighting against the scarcity of resources as well. They had to survive various monsters and dangers, and this was the setting. Marceline with her mother LSE as two survived. She knew of existence of a bunker with other survivors, but only their motorhome. It ended up breaking, and they had to traveling and surviving in the desert. It was only through the power inherited from her father that Marceline managed protect him from an attack by a mutant wolf. However, LSE was ill. Very advanced, perhaps due to radiation. I was hiding this from Marceline, but she was in such a bad state that she wouldn't be able to arrive at that bunker and ask her. If she went ahead, she would catch up quickly, but this has never happened before. Before dying, she leaves a voice message for Marceline, and she, upon arriving therein, bunker, stumbles upon a pile of corpses. No one else was alive, and she unfortunately never received the message from her mother because the phone was too loud for her, and that message would stay there for 1,000 years. Then Marceline, now she would begin to live alone there, raising imaginary friends, making music. It was all a joke, but deep down she was completely alone and desperate.